Hi, Eric Gimbal, ericgimbal.com, and today I'm going to speak about why, when, and how to use manual mode when making pictures. Let's start. First of all, very often we hear this sentence that says everyone is a photographer until he has to shoot in manual mode. And I don't like this sentence, first because it's not true. There are very famous photographers like Sebastian Salgado who works in aperture priority, which is not manual. It's half manual or half automatic. And second, because when people say that, many people who hear this just abandon and think it's so complicated that they prefer to be in automatic because they don't know how to work manual. They think it's really hard because people say that, and I think it's not good because it's not that hard. And second, when I hear this, I think about the person who says this, that always just showing off, a way of saying I know and you don't, or simply it's actually hard for him to, it was hard to learn how to do it because maybe someone didn't explain how easy it is, or maybe it's hard for him to understand things. When I see people showing off about this, well, if you have your camera in your hand, you have all the tools you need to know exactly the exposure. So I don't think there's anything to show off about. Really, if you want to look like wow, you know about light, then without any camera, without any light meter, then you tell what light there is. That's good. And although there is some rules, I mean, if you point at the sun at midday at ISO 100 and 125th of a second, you know then it's f16. In the other way, it's f11. So actually, there are really many tips to know. But if you enter a supermarket and you say, "Whoa, there is such light," and you're right, and then you enter any place and it's like this, then you can say, this guy knows about light. But really there's nothing to show off about if you have the camera in your hand. So I'm going to explain how easy it is and how to do it easily, quickly, and you will dominate the manual mode without any problem. Now I've done the introduction outside, but I'm going to go into my van because I have to write things on a whiteboard so you can understand easy what I want to explain. Okay, let's carry on. Well, first of all, to make sure everything is very clear, and working in manual mode is not going to make better pictures or a better photograph. It may help you to be, yes, obviously, but people think that just because they work in manual, they're good photographers, and that's not the way it is. I mean, working in manual makes you get probably the right exposure or the exposure you want, or the aspect of the picture you want, but it doesn't mean you have the right taste or your taste are liked by other people. Doesn't mean the idea of the picture is good or whatever. So it's really a way of deciding the way you want the picture to be, but not a guarantee of having a good picture. Okay, so that's very important to make that clear. So when people show off telling they're good photographers because they work in manual, no, there's nothing to do with it. I mean, that's obviously a help, but doesn't mean that's a guarantee of results. Second, the idea of working in manual, to understand why it's good to work in manual, or when and why work in manual, you need to know how a camera works in automatic. So you will decide why you should work in manual. So let's say you make a picture in automatic, and obviously the camera is going to try the safe way. For example, I make a landscape. It will select a speed that is fast enough that even if I move, the end result is not blurred. It also knows, the camera maker knows, that if you have the maximum aperture, you don't get the sharpest picture, so it will probably close the aperture a bit, so it's sharper. So it decides like this. Or if I'm at night time, it will probably put the ISO up because the camera thinks that if the speed is too slow, probably it will be moved, but it ignores completely if you've put a tripod or not. So it means the camera will always play on the safe way. So it means it will affect the end result, the way your picture looks. The picture will be nice, probably will be even good. I mean, I always say a camera that makes a mistake make a lot smaller mistake than a photographer that makes mistakes. Okay, so it's really, the camera will go on the safe way. The picture will be okay, but it won't be the way you probably want. So this is why many cameras have automatic mode with scene mode. For example, you say, I want to do a portrait, so it will take into account that you're likely to want a background that is blurred. It will open the aperture at the maximum, so the background is blurred, and because you said you wanted portrait. But what if you wanted a portrait with everything in focus in the background because you want to see the house behind? Well, the camera ignores this, so it means it won't be the way you want. Or you want to make a picture of someone walking, but you want that picture to be moved. So if you've put sport mode, it's likely to put a speed high enough so no one is moved on the picture, when actually you wanted that movement. So this is one of the reasons you want to stay away of automatism, to decide yourself how the camera should work and the way your picture will look. So actually working with your camera in manual is taking decision. The first thing you need is to configure properly your camera so you have it as a great tool to measure the light. So I advise you get the manual of your camera, so you search how to set it up properly and you configure properly measuring light. First of all, here, this is an Olympus camera, any camera is similar. Here you have automatic mode, P mode, I'm not going to speak about it, A mode, it's priority to the aperture. It means here you set the aperture like f2.8 if you want, and the camera will calculate by itself the speed. Here you have speed priority. On camera like Canon, it's written T like time, or there's S like speed. You set the speed and it calculates the aperture by itself. And here you have manual mode, where you decide the aperture and the speed yourself. Okay, so we will work on that. But before working with that, you need to have your tool to be properly configured. So I'm going to explain for two types of cameras: reflex and mirrorless camera. The first part is for reflex cameras and for mirrorless camera. And after I'll make a very small part speaking about just mirrorless, but it's not much different, just a way it's set up and a few information that changes. But this is a great feature that many mirrorless camera have and that really help you to expose properly. How your camera measures the light. Most cameras have 3 or 4 ways of measuring. I'm going to write it here. The first one is spot metering. It measures the light just in the center of the picture. The second one is average. It will take the center and spot of the center. It will make an average of the most part. Like this is like 3 to 5%, depends on the camera. Here it's about 30%. Okay. And the last one is matricial. It will measure the whole picture. So obviously, the way you're going to set your camera is going to give you an information on another. For example, if I am on spot metering and I'm doing a portrait of someone in front of a black background, if with spot metering I point at the face will be properly exposed and the rest will be maybe dark or whatever. Okay. But if instead of pointing at the face, I point at the black background, the camera is going to think that I'm in a dark environment, so it will tell me I need more light. And if I make the picture with this information, the person will be probably completely burnt, fully white, overexposed. If I use the average center, it may happen the same way, but it will take into account more or less what's around the subject or the center of the picture. And if I do matricial, it will make an average of the full picture. So it means if the scene is evenly lit, there's no problem. But if there is some part that really highlight and other parts are really dark, then the average may be a mistake. So that's a bit of a problem. So To work properly in manual, I always recommend you work with spot metering, because you're going to measure exactly where you want to measure. So when you will take your camera, you will look inside and you will point at the part you decide is the most important part, and the light must be perfect there. You will know that sometimes other part will be too light, too much light, and other will be too dark. But you must decide what's the important part. And to decide it, you need to know exactly the light on that part. So you will point at it. I want this to be perfect. How do you know this is perfect? Well, in your viewfinder on the screen, on the back, you have a small scale like this. And here in the center, it means if there's a small stick that moves like this, if it's in the center, it's perfectly exposed. If it's more to the right, it's overexposed. If it's more to the left, it's underexposed. Some camera have it the other way around. All the Nikons, I remember, but normally now they're all like this. Normally anyway, you can change it in your menu configuration to have the overexposed information on the right and underexposed on the left. It means if you're in JPEG, your target is to be in the center. If you're in RAW, you can be actually more on the right because you can get back the highlights. Okay, but let's think simple. Try to be in the center for the time being. Okay, so it means that when I put my spot on the important part of the picture, center, the important part of the picture, the stick must be in the center. If it's on the left, it's underexposed. If it's on the right, it's overexposed. This is my measuring system, and this is what the tool I'm going to use to know if I'm measuring properly the light. I configure my camera for that. So that is the tool. So check in your manual or you set this. Now we're going to speak about how to make the decision of configuring a way on another. Basically, in a picture, you have to decide what's important, the depth of field or the movement in my picture. The depth of field, I take a picture of this finger and I want everything behind to be in focus and everything in the front to be in focus. This is a large, deep depth of field, important depth of field. If I want it not sharp before and not sharp behind, this is a shallow depth of field. Okay, so I will configure for that the camera. To configure for that, I will work with the aperture f2, f2.8, f8, f16, f20, f22, whatever. Okay, I will work with that. Obviously, the depth of field, there are more things that will affect depth of field. With telelens, the depth of field is shallower. With wide angle, the depth of field is deeper. Okay, so it also affects the distance of the subject. The closest to subject, the shallower depth of field, and also the size of the sensor. Obviously, you're not going to change the sensor of your camera, so we're going to work with what you have available, which is distance, all this stuff. But still, we're going to speak about aperture because this is about measuring in manual mode. Okay, so we're going to work with that. So if the important thing for you is the depth of field, you will play with aperture. If the important thing for you is the movement, that like a person walking is frozen or is actually you see some movement, it's like blurred, movement blurred, then you will work with the speed, with the time. First, I see many people that don't know the scale of aperture. It's important you know it. So I'm going to write it for you. Okay, I'll write it for you. Like from 1.0, 1.4, 2.0, 2.8, f4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22. I know that you're going to tell, yeah, but in my camera I've got f8, f9, f10, f11. Why don't you have f9 and f10? Why? Basically because these are full aperture. And yeah, what you think a third, like f8 is a full aperture, f9 is f8 plus 1/3, f10 is f8 plus 2/3, and then f11 is an extra full stop, full aperture. Okay, so you need to know the entire one. And what you need to know really is that 2.8 is twice more light than f4, and f2 is twice more light than 2.8, and 2.8 is half the light of f2. So sometimes people say, yeah, that's really strange, I went from f8 to f11 and now it's really underexposed, and it was just that little jump, few numbers. You divided light by 2, so it's not just a little jump. So it's important you're aware of this. So the smaller the number, the more light. Okay, the higher the number, the less light. All right, the smaller the number, the less depth of field, DOF, depth of field, and the higher the number, the more depth of field. It means that if you decide that the important part in your photo is the depth of field, you're going to select it according to this. For the lens you're using, obviously you could change lens or whatever and then affect, but we can speak about the lens you have right now on your camera. I want shallow depth of field, I use small number, 1.4, 1.2, 1.2, 2.0, 2.8. The shortest you have, the smallest you have on your gear. Okay. And if you want a long, deep depth of field, then 16, 11, whatever. Take into account that the more you open the lens, the less sharpness you have, and the more you close your lens, the more aberration, chromatic aberration you may have, and that the quality is not as good. Okay, so but we're going to forget this right now. So you decide the depth of field you want, selecting the right aperture. So it means you take your camera, I fix my aperture f4, and I see it tells me I'm underexposed. So I play with the speed until I get 0 there. You can see I get 0. Okay, so I fix my aperture, I play with the speed. If the important part for me is not actually the depth of field but the movement in that picture, I speak about people moving, not how when I move, because it's too slow I move, then I use a tripod. Okay, I speak of what's happening in my picture, whether it's a tree moving because it's windy, or someone walking, or a car moving, or whatever. Then I will play with the speed. So how does the speed works? I'm going to write the scale also. Okay, I've written the scale from 1 second up to 8,000th of a second. Actually, most cameras can go as slow as 30 seconds. Then you have a bulb time. If you keep your finger on the trigger, the picture keeps going. Okay, and beginner camera normally go up to 2,000th of a second, 4,000th of a second. Advanced camera up to 8,000th of a second. And now with electronic shutter, sometimes 16,000th of a second, 32,000th of a second. But we're going to keep it in normal. Okay, according to your camera. Okay. Here, the slower the speed, the more light you get. The higher the speed, the less light you get. Obviously, it's easier to understand this part because everyone knows that half a second is shorter than 1 second. Eighth of a second is shorter than 1/4 of a second. So it's easier to understand. Here I also put the full stops, as we call. Okay, so when you do 1/60th of a second, you have half the light of 1/30th of a second. If you are 125th, you have half the light of 60th of a second, and so on, and the other around too. Okay, so in your camera you also have thirds. To fine tune, like you have 1/60th of a second, 1/80th of a second, 100th of a second, and then the full stop, 125th of a second. Okay, so but let's keep it simple. The shorter the time, the less light will get in your camera, and the longer the time, the more light you will get. Movement, action. The longer time, you get more movement. And the shorter, the less movement. Okay? It's logical. If you make a picture of 1 second, if someone walks, it will have moved, it will be blurred. If you make 8,000ths of a second, it's so fast that even if he's walking, it will be frozen like this. Okay? So it's important that you take this into account according to what you want. More light, more movement, less movement, and you're going to play with the speed like this. If I decide to work that important is the movement, I will set the speed. For example, I decide I want to be 1/15th of a second, let's say, okay, and it's overexposed, so I will close my aperture until I get 0. Sorry, I passed it. That's what I'm pointing at, okay, until I get 0. This way I know it's properly exposed. Okay. But there are some limits. There are some limits. Physical limits limited by your camera or by yourself. Let's say I wanted to work at a speed of 500 of a second. Okay, so I'm going to bring the aperture down. I'm 2.8, I'm still 2 stop underexposed. So I would need to be, if it's 2.8, 1 stop will be f2, 2 stop will be 1.4, but this lens doesn't open at 1.4. So what option do I have? Well, you have the option of the Joker. The Joker is called the ISO. Okay, so I'm going to write the ISO, 100 ISO, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, and so on. It depends on the camera. The smallest the ISO, the less sensitivity it has. The higher the ISO, the more sensibility. 100, less light. 6400, it's like having more light. Okay, but smaller ISO, less noise. Higher ISO, more noise. But many people think that the only reason to have noise, which are small dots appearing on your picture, is because of the ISO, and this is not true. The reason number one for noise is underexposure. When you're underexposed, when you're going to edit your picture, you're going to pull the light up, and where there is no information because it was underexposed, some grain will appear. It's always better to be a bit higher ISO and to have the right exposure than to stay short and then to have to pull up the light in the computer, but then you get some noise. Okay, the smallest ISO, more dynamic range, and the higher ISO, less dynamic range. What does that mean? Let's say I was speaking about a picture of a landscape. I've got a small tree here, I've got a cloud up there, and at 100 ISO, I see that the cloud is okay, that I see some texture in there. But if I go to 6400 ISO, maybe I get my tree okay, but in the highlights there, and maybe the dark shadows also, I see that the where I saw some details in the shadows, now there's no details, all dark, and in the cloud you don't see details anymore, now it's all white, because you've shortened the dynamic range. So it's very important that when you're going to touch the ISO, that you use it just what you need, not more, not less. Don't keep underexposed just because you're afraid of putting the ISO up, and don't put the ISO up if you don't need it. Just use it the way you need. It's like if you're going to put some salt in the soup, don't put more salt just in case it doesn't taste much. Taste, okay, I need a bit more salt and pepper, for example, you put a bit more, then you taste again, that's fine, that's it. I don't need more. I don't want to stay short. I don't want to get more, to put more than I need. So this is actually the joker. It means like right now I could not get more light in there. I'm underexposed, 1.7 stop, I'm at 2.8, and the only way to get more light in there is to pull my ISO up. So I'm going to do so by 2 stops, more or less, okay? And you see now, I'm still underexposed. I've pulled up my ISO, now you see that I'm on 0 at 2.8. I'm right exposed. Why? Because I use the joker of my camera, which is called ISO. There's another joker, is like playing card. I mean joker. It means like, let's say I am at 2.8, and I want to have a time of 1 second because I want shallow depth of field, and I want time long enough to see some movement in my picture. For example, no? Oh, yeah, I want to see some movement in my picture. But there is too much light entering. So I cannot touch the speed because I want 1 second. And I cannot touch the aperture because I want that depth of field. And my ISO is already at the minimum. So I cannot put lower to get less light. So what you need to use is a filter, a neutral density filter. It's like sunglasses you put on the lens, and it sells by stops. Like, if I am 3 stops overexposed, then if I put a 3-stop filter, it will cut the light and then I will be properly exposed. Or sometimes it's just because it's so sunny, I'm already on the maximum speed I can put in my camera. I'm at 8,000th of a second. I cannot put more. I need a very wide aperture because I want a really shallow depth of field, but I cannot put my my speed higher, so I put a neutral density filter on the lens to cut the light. So these are really the two jokers you can actually use. And then there's a third one, which is a tripod, in case you don't want to put the ISO higher and to keep a speed up, or you want a slow speed and there's nothing moving in the scene, or it's the way you want, you can always put a tripod. But the main 2 things to play with, the main 3 things as aperture and speed, you use one or the other, fix one, use the other one to compensate. And if you're locked, you use the ISO and then maybe a neutral density filter, okay? But this is the way to work. So it's very easy. I'm going to take my camera, I point at the important part of the picture that I need to be properly exposed, and I set my exposition. I've fixed before all the aperture of the speed, and I use the other one. If I'm locked on either side, I use a filter or I use the ISO, okay? Once this is done, I don't have to think about anything. If the scene is not changing, I can make 1000 pictures in that place, in that situation, and the exposure will be always the same as long as the light is not changing. I know some people will say, why not use then aperture or speed priority, and the camera calculate the rest? Because if I use that and the scene is not evenly lit, every time I will need to measure again. If I reframe, the face is the important part. I measure the face, I reframe, I shot. Again, on the picture, I reframe, I measure again, and this. It's a lot easier to lock on manual and get this steady. You always get it falling all the time. If you are using flashes, same thing. Although what I'm speaking about here, I will not speak about flashes because it's more complicated, and I speak just about without flash. But in case you would be using an external flash, I don't speak about TTL, but even TTL you will need to measure every time. If you're using manual flashes, until you make the picture, you don't actually know the light there is on the scene. So if you've measured the light, whether with a light meter or with a few picture fine tuning, you get the right manual setting, then you don't have to worry. Even if you don't measure again every time you trigger the flash, you know that the exposure is the right one. So it's set, it's manual, that's it. If you were using flashes, Don't forget also there is a synchro limit you must take into account, but I'm not going to speak about this in this basic entry-level explanation of manual measuring. So you've decided how you work. You point at the important part, you make sure the small stick is in the center or a bit to the right, and then you can shoot. That's it. That was for reflex camera and mirrorless if you want. Mirrorless have something else. When you're using a reflex camera, what you see is actually what the mirror is getting. It's not actually hitting the light, it's not actually hitting the sensor right now. So you don't actually preview the real picture. You have some measuring, but it's not really what the picture is going to come out. Normally it's very similar, but you don't have the information everywhere. With a mirrorless camera, you have the option to see in real time how the exposure will be on the full picture. I'll leave you a link to how to set it up on the Olympus, but you have also something similar on Fujifilm and also on Sony. I'm going to show you. Like this, as you can see, in orange, it tells me it's overexposed. And if I go in underexposed, I'll put my hand here so we cut the light directly. If it's underexposed here, you see some blue somewhere, some blue area. You see some blue, okay. This means it's underexposed. This way I can know before triggering if the picture is going to be overexposed or underexposed, and where. Obviously, if I want to know where it's going to be over or underexposed, if I do spot metering, I get the information just in this part. And as the mirrorless system let me know the information on the full picture before triggering, I need to use matricial measuring. So it will measure over the full picture and give me the information in real time. So this is a big difference between mirrorless and reflex camera. And this is one of the reasons I really prefer mirrorless, because you know beforehand where and how the picture will be exposed. Sometimes it doesn't mean it won't be overexposed, underexposed, but you know where it will be, because sometimes the situation has such a high dynamic range that there is no way that with one shot you can get the cloud to be fine and the small wood next door or the small tree or whatever properly exposed. So you have to decide what's important, the cloud or the rest, or make some average yourself and decide. But you have all the information beforehand. For this you need to have the measuring over the whole frame. That's very important. But this way you really can nail the possibility of your camera regarding dynamic range, all this, and have the best exposure and decide what's important, if the cloud, if the tree, or whatever. Okay, but you have all this information. So don't forget, if you have a mirrorless camera, I recommend you use this system, go matricial, and activate the warning of under and overexposed in real time over the full frame. So this way you have the exact information. Something that is really important and many people speak about are actually the histogram. So I'm going to make a picture here. I'm going to make the picture in I review the picture here, and I can actually activate histogram. That will give me, or like this, give me where are the highlights and where are the shadows and where is everything. Reading a histogram is not an easy task. I'll probably do a separate video to explain this, because this one is a really long video, so I'll explain separately. But reading a histogram is not easy. Like this, you would think, oh, it's overexposed, it's underexposed, what's this? But as you can see, you have some clouds and then you have some dark parts. It's hard to read. You must understand this. It's not easy. So using histogram is a way to confirm if the exposure was right, but it's not the way to expose. The way to expose is making the right decision before. Okay, it's just confirming the result is fine. But I'll do a separate video about reading an histogram. Now you know all this, that you have to make the decision whether the important is the depth of field or the movement. Now what you need to do is to train. You have several ways of training. First, you must learn how your decision will affect the end picture. So for that, you're going to get some bottles or whatever, and line them, and then play with depth of field. You're going to put your camera on a tripod and change the aperture and see how it affects the depth of field. You will notice that when you look in your screen, like there in the viewfinder, if you're at 2.8 and then you go to f8, you see exactly the same depth of field, and you think, well, that's strange, because after when I look at the picture I've made, it's different. Why is it the same? Well, that's very easy. When you make a picture, your camera needs to do the autofocus and need the maximum light. So it's going to open your aperture at the maximum. Then when you trigger, it closes to what you've put. For example, this lens is 2.8. If I'm at f8, if I look at this, the lens is open at maximum, which is 2.8, so it gets more light for autofocusing. If I want to see what really is f8 like, I need to press this depth of field preview button. So then it will close the aperture to f8, and I will see how it will really show on the end picture. Not every camera has this small button for depth of field preview. Basic cameras very often don't have it. If you have it and you are not going to work at maximum aperture, always press it before triggering, just to have a look to make sure this is the depth of field you like. Okay, so that's one of the reasons. So you're going to train to learn what kind of end result you get and what you like most. Like for a portrait or whatever, I need such depth of field. This means that when you will set your camera, you will think, for that I need 2.8, or no, I need f4, or I need f10 or f11 or whatever. Same thing with speed. You can make picture of cars passing by your house and change the speed to see how it affects. If you can put the camera on a tripod, so it's not your movement, it's just a car, and you'll see if it's frozen or if it's moved or it looks all this, and you can work on it. So you go learning the result of your decision, because that will decide the style of your picture. So this is something you must know that will help you make the decision. Measuring is easy. Measuring, you've seen, it's quite easy. What's difficult is deciding depending on the results I want. Okay. Another thing you can do is, when you don't know, you put your camera in automatic to learn. For learning, you put your camera in automatic. I'm going to make a picture right now. Okay. Then when you've made the picture, you go to play and you go to the information. It tells you 7.1 aperture, 500th of a second, 200 ISO. This is where it decided, well, this camera has minimum 200 on ISO, no? So you make it in automatic and you look at the picture. Okay, instead of 7.1, I'm going to say 8, so it's easier for my calculation, but it could be 7.1. Okay, so you say, okay, so at 500th of a second, aperture f8, 200 ISO, I get this look. I want to have a shorter depth of field. I would like to have 2.8. Why? Because I want the shortest depth of field my lens will let me do. It's just a f8 5.6, 1 stop, f4 2 stop, 2.8 3 stops. I've got 3 jumps. So if I go down to 2.8, I'll get a lot more light. So if I was on 500th of a second, I should go to 500 to 1000, 1 stop, 1000 to 2000, 2 stop, 2000 to 4000, 3 stops. The exposure will be the same, but the way it looks will be different. So very often to train, you can use in automatic, see what the camera is telling you, and then start from there. And I think this is a really good way of learning, because you see what the camera decides, and more or less, as I said at the beginning, a camera that makes a mistake, the mistake is never as big as if a photographer makes the mistake. So this way, you will get something to start from and keep learning this way. So it's very important that everything I've said, you train, you learn, you practice, you think, you test, because very often people ask, I'm going to do a picture of this, what setting should I put? I don't know what setting you should put. I don't know how you like the picture. I don't know if you like the picture to have something blurred. I don't like if you like the picture to have everything in focus or short depth of field. I don't know what you want. The only person that may know that is you. So you must learn to know how the result is according to what your setting are. So it's very important that you are practicing. So it's a very long video. There are many information, extra information I could put in there, and I didn't put in there because this is just for a start, to have a basic knowledge. If it was with flash unit, it would be a lot more complicated, and there are more things you could use to have the right measuring, the right thing. But I think this basic way of working, making a decision from start, will help you work and get in manual the look you want for your picture. So I hope this video has helped you. I'm probably forgotten a lot of things. Maybe people will comment, yeah, you didn't say that. Yeah, I know, I forgot many things, but I think this is a step one. I will do a separate video about histogram, about the histogram sometime. I don't know when, but sometime. But start practicing with this. Make the decision. So conclusion is, decide what's important, depth of field or movement. If it's depth of field, you fix the aperture and play with the speed, and you have the ISO as a joker, sometimes a neutral density filter. It's the important thing is movement. You fix the speed and then you play with aperture, and then if needed ISO or neutral density filter, and don't forget also sometimes on tripod. But this is basically it. So it's not complicated, just practice. But this is the way it works. If you think this video may help some people, please share it on Facebook or social networks or Facebook photography groups or whatever. If you have not done yet, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a small button down here and a small bell. If you click on it, you'll get notified when I upload a new video. My website, ericgimbal.com. If you have any question, please leave a comment below or send me an email to info@ericgimbal.com. And also, I've put some link of my gear on Amazon and links of other part of my YouTube channel in description. Thank you very much. Bye.